Chapter 22 of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bologna Times. Camille by Alexandre Dumas Fil. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 22. It seemed to me as if the train did not move. I reached Bougival at 11. Not a window in the house was lighted up, and when I rang no one answered the bell. It was the first time that such a thing had occurred to me. At last the gardener came. I entered. Nanine met me with a light. I went to Marguerite's room. "Where is Madame?" "Gone to Paris," replied Nanine. "To Paris?" "Yes, sir." "When?" "An hour after you." "She left no word for me?" "Nothing." Nanine left me. Perhaps she had some suspicion or other, I thought, and went to Paris to make sure that my visit to my father was not an excuse for a day off. Perhaps Prudence wrote to her about something important, I said to myself when I was alone, but I saw Prudence. She said nothing to make me suppose that she had written to Marguerite. All at once I remembered Madame Duvernoy's question, "Isn't she coming to-day?" when I had said that Marguerite was ill. I remembered at the same time how embarrassed Prudence had appeared when I looked at her after this remark, which seemed to indicate an appointment. I remembered, too, Marguerite's tears all day long, which my father's kind reception had rather put out of my mind. From this moment all the incidents grouped themselves about my first suspicion, and fixed it so firmly in my mind that everything served to confirm it, even my father's kindness. Marguerite had almost insisted on my going to Paris. She had pretended to be calmer when I had proposed staying with her. Had I fallen into some trap? Was Marguerite deceiving me? Had she counted on being back in time for me to not perceive her absence, and had she been detained by chance? Why had she said nothing to Nanine, or why had she not written? What was the meaning of those tears, this absence, this mystery? That is what I asked myself in affright, as I stood in the vacant room, gazing at the clock, which pointed to midnight, and seemed to say to me that it was too late to hope for my mistress's return. Yet, after all the arrangements we had just made, after the sacrifices that had been offered and accepted, was it likely that she was deceiving me? No, I tried to get rid of my first supposition. Probably she had found a purchaser for her furniture, and had gone to Paris to conclude the bargain. She did not wish to tell me beforehand, for she knew that, though I had consented to it, the sale, so necessary to our future happiness, was painful to me, and she feared to wound my self-respect in speaking to me about it. She would rather not see me till the whole thing was done, and that was evidently why Prudence was expecting her when she let out the secret. Marguerite could not finish the whole business to-day, and was staying the night with Prudence, or perhaps she would come home even now, for she must know how anxious I should be, and would not wish to leave me in that condition. But if so, why those tears? No doubt, despite her love for me, the poor girl could not make up her mind to give up all the luxury in which she had lived until now, and for which she had been so envied, without crying over it. I was quite ready to forgive her for such regrets. I waited for her impatiently, that I might say to her, as I covered her with kisses, that I had guessed the reason of her mysterious absence. Nevertheless, the night went on, and Marguerite did not return. My anxiety tightened its circle little by little, and began to oppress my head and heart. Perhaps something had happened to her. Perhaps she was injured, ill, dead. Perhaps a messenger would arrive with the news of some dreadful accident. Perhaps the daylight would find me with the same uncertainty and with the same fears. The idea that Marguerite was perhaps unfaithful to me at the very moment when I waited for her in terror at her absence did not return to my mind. There must be some cause, independent of her will, to keep her away from me, and the more I thought, the more convinced I was that this cause could only be some mishap or other. Oh, vanity of man, coming back to us in every form! 1 o'clock struck. I said to myself that I would wait another hour, but that at 2 o'clock, if Marguerite had not returned, I would set out for Paris. Meanwhile I looked about for a book, for I dared not think. Manon Lescaut was open on the table. It seemed to me that here and there the pages were wet as with tears. I turned the leaves over and then closed the book, for the letters seemed to me void of meaning through the veil of my doubts. Time went slowly. The sky was covered with clouds. An autumn rain lashed the windows. The empty bed seemed at moments to assume the aspect of a tomb. I was afraid. I opened the door. I listened, and heard nothing but the voice of the wind in the trees. Not a vehicle was to be seen on the road. The half-hour sounded sadly from the church tower. I began to fear lest someone should enter. It seemed to me that only a disaster could come at that hour and under that sombre sky. 2 o'clock struck. I still waited a little. Only the sound of the bell troubled the silence with its monotonous and rhythmical stroke. At last I left the room, where every object had assumed that melancholy aspect which the restless solitude of the heart gives to all its surroundings. In the next room I found Nanine sleeping over her work. At the sound of the door she awoke and asked if her mistress had come in. No, but if she comes in, tell her that I was so anxious that I had to go to Paris. At this hour? Yes. But how? You won't find a carriage. I will walk. But it is raining. No matter. But madame will be coming back, or if she doesn't come it will be time enough in the morning to go and see what has kept her. You will be murdered on the way. There is no danger, my dear Nanine. I will see you tomorrow. The good girl went and got me a cloak, put it over my shoulders, and offered to wake up Madame Arnould to see if a vehicle could be obtained, but I would hear of nothing, convinced as I was that I should lose, in a perhaps fruitless inquiry, more time than I should take to cover half the road. Besides, I felt the need of air and physical fatigue in order to cool down the over-excitement which possessed me. I took the key of the flat in the Rue d'Antin, and after saying good-bye to Nanine, who came with me as far as the gate, I set out. At first I began to run, but the earth was muddy with rain, and I fatigued myself doubly. At the end of half an hour I was obliged to stop, and I was drenched with sweat. I recovered my breath and went on. The night was so dark that at every step I feared to dash myself against one of the trees on the roadside, which rose up sharply before me, like great phantoms rushing upon me. I overtook one or two wagons, which I soon left behind. A carriage was going at full gallop toward Bougival. As it passed me, the hope came to me that Marguerite was in it. I stopped and cried out, "Marguerite! Marguerite!" But no one answered, and the carriage continued its course. I watched it fade away in the distance, and then started on my way again. I took 2 hours to reach the Barrière de la Tuile. The sight of Paris restored my strength, and I ran the whole length of the alley I had so often walked. That night no one was passing. It was like going through the midst of a dead city. The dawn began to break. When I reached the Rue d'Antin, the great city stirred a little before quite awakening. 5 o'clock struck at the church at Saint Roch at the moment when I entered Marguerite's house. I called out my name to the porter, who had had from me enough 20-franc pieces to know that I had the right to call on Mademoiselle Gautier at 5 in the morning. I passed without difficulty. I might have asked if Marguerite was at home, but he might have said "No," and I preferred to remain in doubt 2 minutes longer, for, as long as I doubted, there was still hope. I listened at the door, trying to discover a sound, a movement. Nothing. The silence of the country seemed to be continued here. I opened the door and entered. All the curtains were hermetically closed. I drew those of the dining room and went toward the bedroom, and pushed open the door. I sprang at the curtain cord and drew it violently. The curtain opened. A faint light made its way in. I rushed to the bed. It was empty. I opened the doors one after another. I visited every room. No one. It was enough to drive one mad. I went into the dressing room, opened the window, and called Prudence several times. Madame Duvernoy's window remained closed. I went downstairs to the porter and asked if Mademoiselle Gautier had come home during the day. "Yes," answered the man, "with Madame Duvernoy." "She left no word for me?" "No." "Do you know what they did afterward?" "They went away in a carriage." "What sort of carriage?" "A private carriage." What could it all mean? I rang at the next door. "Where are you going, sir?" asked the porter when he had opened to me. "To Madame Duvernoy's." "She has not come back." "You are sure?" "Yes, sir. Here's a letter even, which was brought for her last night, and which I have not yet given her." And the porter showed me a letter which I glanced at mechanically. I recognized Marguerite's writing. I took the letter. It was addressed to Madame Duvernoy to forward to Monsieur Duval. "This letter is for me," I said to the porter, as I showed him the address. "You are Monsieur Duval?" he replied. "Yes." "Ah, I remember. You often came to see Madame Duvernoy." When I was in the street I broke the seal of the letter. If a thunderbolt had fallen at my feet I should have been less startled than I was by what I read. "By the time you read this letter, Armand, I shall be the mistress of another man. All is over between us. Go back to your father, my friend, and to your sister, and there, by the side of a pure young girl, ignorant of all our miseries, you will soon forget what you would have suffered through that lost creature who is called Marguerite Gautier, whom you have loved for an instant, and who owes to you the only happy moments of a life which, she hopes, will not be very long now." When I had read the last word I thought I should have gone mad. For a moment I was really afraid of falling in the street. A cloud passed before my eyes, and my blood beat in my temples. At last I came to myself a little. I looked about me, and was astonished to see the life of others continue without pausing at my distress. I was not strong enough to endure the blow alone. Then I remembered that my father was in the same city, that I might be with him in 10 minutes, and that, whatever might be the cause of my sorrow, he would share it. I ran like a madman, like a thief, to the Hotel de Paris. I found the key in the door of my father's room. I entered. He was reading. He showed so little astonishment at seeing me that it was as if he was expecting me. I flung myself into his arms without saying a word. I gave him Marguerite's letter, and falling on my knees beside his bed, I wept hot tears. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bologna Times. Camille by Alexandre Dumas Fil. Translated by Edmond Goss. Chapter 23. When the current of life had resumed its course, I could not believe that the day which I saw dawning would not be like those which had preceded it. There were moments when I fancied that some circumstance, which I could not recollect, had obliged me to spend the night away from Marguerite, but that, if I returned to Bougival, I should find her again, as anxious as I had been, and that she would ask me what had detained me away from her so long. When one's existence has contracted a habit, such as that of this love, it seems impossible that the habit should be broken without at the same time breaking all the other springs of life. I was forced from time to time to reread Marguerite's letter, in order to convince myself that I had not been dreaming. My body, succumbing to the moral shock, was incapable of movement. Anxiety, the night walk, and the morning's news had prostrated me. My father profited by this total prostration of all my faculties to demand of me a formal promise to accompany him. I promised all that he asked, for I was incapable of sustaining a discussion, and I needed some affection to help me live, after what had happened. I was too thankful that my father was willing to console me under such a calamity. All I remember is that on that day, about 5 o'clock, he took me with him in a post chaise. Without a word to me, he had had my luggage packed and put up behind the chaise with his own, and so he carried me off. I did not realize what I was doing until the town had disappeared, and the solitude of the road recalled to me the emptiness of my heart. Then my tears again began to flow. My father had realized that words, even from him, would do nothing to console me, and he let me weep without saying a word, only sometimes pressing my hand, as if to remind me that I had a friend at my side. At night I slept a little. I dreamt of Marguerite. I woke with a start, not recalling why I was in the carriage. Then the truth came back upon me, and I let my head sink on my breast. I dared not say anything to my father. I was afraid he would say, "You see, I was right when I declared that this woman did not love you." But he did not use his advantage, and we reached C without his having said anything to me except to speak of matters quite apart from the event which had occasioned my leaving Paris. When I embraced my sister, I remembered what Marguerite had said about her in her letter, and I saw at once how little my sister, good as she was, would be able to make me forget my mistress. Shooting had begun, and my father thought that it would be a distraction for me. He got up shooting parties with friends and neighbors. I went without either reluctance or enthusiasm, with that sort of apathy into which I had sunk since my departure. We were beating about for game, and I was given my post. I put down my loaded gun at my side, and meditated. I watched the clouds pass. I let my thought wander over the solitary plains, and from time to time I heard someone call to me and point to a hare not 10 paces off. None of these details escaped my father, and he was not deceived by my exterior calm. He was well aware that, broken as I now was, I should some day experience a terrible reaction, which might be dangerous, and, without seeming to make any effort to console me, he did his utmost to distract my thoughts. My sister, naturally, knew nothing of what had happened, and she could not understand how it was that I, who had formerly been so light-hearted, had suddenly become so sad and dreamy. Sometimes, surprising in the midst of my sadness my father's anxious scrutiny, I pressed his hand as if to ask him tacitly to forgive me for the pain which, in spite of myself, I was giving him. Thus a month passed, but at the end of that time I could endure it no longer. The memory of Marguerite pursued me unceasingly. I had loved, I still loved this woman so much that I could not suddenly become indifferent to her. I had to love or to hate her. Above all, whatever I felt for her, I had to see her again, and at once. This desire possessed my mind, and with all the violence of a will which had begun to reassert itself in a body so long inert. It was not enough for me to see Marguerite in a month, a week. I had to see her the very next day after the day when the thought had occurred to me, and I went to my father and told him that I had been called to Paris on business, but that I should return promptly. No doubt he guessed the reason for my departure, for he insisted that I should stay. But, seeing that if I did not carry out my intention, the consequences, in the state in which I was, might be fatal, he embraced me, and begged me, almost with tears, to return without delay. I did not sleep on the way to Paris. Once there, what was I going to do? I did not know. I only knew that it must be something connected with Marguerite. I went to my rooms to change my clothes, and, as the weather was fine and it was still early, I made my way to the Champs-Élysées. At the end of half an hour I saw Marguerite's carriage at some distance, coming from the Rond Point to the Place de la Concorde. She had repurchased her horses, for the carriage was just as I was accustomed to see it, but she was not in it. Scarcely had I noticed this fact, when looking around me I saw Marguerite on foot, accompanied by a woman whom I had never seen. As she passed me she turned pale, and a nervous smile tightened about her lips. For my part, my heart beat violently in my breast, but I succeeded in giving a cold expression to my face, as I bowed coldly to my former mistress, who just then reached her carriage, into which she got with her friend. I knew Marguerite. This unexpected meeting must certainly have upset her. No doubt she had heard that I had gone away, and had thus been reassured as to the consequences of our rupture. But, seeing me again in Paris, finding herself face to face with me, pale as I was, she must have realized that I had not returned without purpose, and she must have asked herself what that purpose was. If I had seen Marguerite unhappy, if, in revenging myself upon her, I could have come to her aid, I should perhaps have forgiven her, and certainly I should have never dreamt of doing her an injury. But I found her apparently happy. Some one else had restored to her the luxury which I could not give her. Her breaking with me seemed to assume a character of the basest self-interest. I was lowered in my own esteem as well as in my love. I resolved that she should pay for what I had suffered. I could not be indifferent to what she did. Consequently, what would hurt her the most would be my indifference. It was, therefore, this sentiment which I must affect, not only in her eyes, but in the eyes of others. I tried to put on a smiling countenance, and I went to call on Prudence. The maid announced me, and I had to wait a few minutes in the drawing-room. At last Madame Duvernoy appeared, and asked me into her boudoir. As I seated myself, I heard the drawing-room door open, a light footstep made the floor creak, and the front door was closed violently. "I am disturbing you?" I said to Prudence. "Not in the least. Marguerite was there. When she heard you announced, she made her escape. It was she who has just gone out." "Is she afraid of me now?" "No, but she is afraid that you would not wish to see her." "But why?" I said, drawing my breath with difficulty, for I was choked with emotion. "The poor girl left me for her carriage, her furniture, and her diamonds. She did quite right, and I don't bear her any grudge. I met her to-day," I continued carelessly. "Where?" asked Prudence, looking at me and seeming to ask herself if this was the same man whom she had known so madly in love. "In the Champs-Élysées. She was with another woman, very pretty. Who is she?" "What was she like?" "Blonde, slender, with side curls, blue eyes, very elegant." "Ah, it was Olympe. She is really very pretty." "Whom does she live with?" "With nobody. With anybody." "Where does she live?" "Rue Tronchet." "No. Do you want to make love to her?" "One never knows." "And Marguerite?" "I should hardly tell you the truth if I said I think no more about her. But I am one of those with whom everything depends on the way in which one breaks with them. Now Marguerite ended with me so lightly that I realize I was a great fool to have been as much in love with her as I was, for I was really very much in love with that girl." You can imagine the way in which I said that. The sweat broke out on my forehead. She was very fond of you, you know, and she still is. The proof is, that after meeting you today, she came straight to tell me about it. When she got here, she was all of a tremble. I thought she was going to faint." "Well, what did she say?" "She said, 'He is sure to come here,' and she begged me to ask you to forgive her." "I have forgiven her, you may tell her. She was a good girl, but, after all, like the others, and I ought to have expected what happened. I am even grateful to her, for I see now what would have happened if I had lived with her altogether. It was ridiculous." "She will be very glad to find that you take it so well. It was quite time she left you, my dear fellow. The rascal of an agent, to whom she had offered to sell her furniture, went around to her creditors to find out how much she owed. They took fright, and in 2 days she would have been sold up." "And now it is all paid?" "More or less." "And who has supplied the money?" "The Comte d'N. Ah, my dear friend, there are men made on purpose for such occasions. To cut a long story short, he gave her 20,000 francs, but he has had his way at last. He knows quite well that Marguerite is not in love with him, but he is very nice with her all the same. As you have seen, he has repurchased her horses, he has taken her jewels out of pawn, and he gives her as much money as the duke used to give her. If she likes to live quietly, he will stay with her a long time." "And what is she doing? Is she living in Paris altogether?" "She would never go back to Bougival after you went. I had to go myself and see after all her things, and yours too. I made a package of them, and you can send here for them. You will find everything, except a little case with your initials. Marguerite wanted to keep it. If you really want it, I will ask her for it." "Let her keep it," I stammered, for I felt the tears rise from my heart to my eyes at the recollection of the village where I had been so happy, and at the thought that Marguerite cared to keep something which had belonged to me and would recall me to her. If she had entered at that moment, my thoughts of vengeance would have disappeared, and I should have fallen at her feet. "For the rest," continued Prudence, "I never saw her as she is now. She hardly takes any sleep. She goes to all the balls, she goes to suppers, she even drinks. The other day, after a supper, she had to stay in bed for a week, and when the doctor let her get up, she began again at the risk of her life. Shall you go and see her? What is the good? I came to see you because you have always been charming to me, and I knew you before I even knew Marguerite. I owe it to you that I have been her lover, and also, don't I, that I am her lover no longer? Well, I did all I could to get her away from you, and I believe you will be thankful to me later on. I owe you a double gratitude," I added, rising, for I was disgusted with the woman, seeing her take every word I said to her as if it were serious. "You are going?" "Yes." I had learned enough. "When shall I be seeing you?" "Soon. Good bye." "Good bye." Prudence saw me to the door, and I went back to my own rooms with tears of rage in my eyes and a desire for vengeance in my heart. So Marguerite was no different from the others. So the steadfast love that she had had for me could not resist the desire of returning to her former life, and the need of having a carriage and plunging into dissipation. So I said to myself, as I lay awake at night, though if I had reflected as calmly as I professed to, I should have seen in this new and turbulent life of Marguerite the attempt to silence a constant thought, a ceaseless memory. However, evil passion had the upper hand, and I only sought for some means of avenging myself on the poor creature. Oh, how petty and vile is man when he is wounded in one of his narrow passions! This Olympe, whom I had seen, was, if not a friend of Marguerite, at all events the woman with whom she was most often seen since her return to Paris. She was going to give a ball, and, as I took it for granted that Marguerite would be there, I tried to get an invitation, and succeeded. When, full of my sorrowful emotions I arrived at the ball, it was already very animated. They were dancing, shouting even, and in one of the quadrilles I perceived Marguerite dancing with the Comte de N., who seemed proud of showing her off, as if he said to everybody, "This woman is mine." I leaned against the mantelpiece just opposite Marguerite, and watched her dancing. Her face changed the moment she caught sight of me. I saluted her casually with a glance of the eyes and a wave of the hand. When I reflected that after the ball she would go home, not with me but with that rich fool, when I thought of what would follow their return, the blood rose to my face, and I felt the need of doing something to trouble their relations. After the contredanse I went up to the mistress of the house, who displayed for the benefit of her guests a dazzling bosom and magnificent shoulders. She was beautiful, and, from the point of view of figure, more beautiful than Marguerite. I realized this fact still more clearly from certain glances which Marguerite bestowed upon her while I was talking with her. The man who was the lover of such a woman might well be as proud as Monsieur de N., and she was beautiful enough to inspire a passion not less great than that which Marguerite had inspired in me. At that moment she had no lover. It would not be difficult to become so. It depended only on showing enough money to attract her attention. I made up my mind. That woman should be my mistress. I began by dancing with her. Half an hour afterward, Marguerite, pale as death, put on her pelisse and left the ball. End of chapter 23.
Of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Camille by Alexandre Dumas Fils. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 24. It was something already, but it was not enough. I saw the hold which I had upon this woman, and I took a cowardly advantage of it. When I think that she is dead now, I ask myself if God will ever forgive me for the wrong I did her. After the supper, which was noisy as could be, there was gambling. I sat by the side of Olympe, and put down my money so recklessly that she could not but notice me. In an instant I had gained 150 or 200 louis, which I spread out before me on the table, and on which she fastened her eyes greedily. I was the only one not completely absorbed by the game, and able to pay her some attention. All the rest of the night I gained, and it was I who gave her money to play, for she had lost all she had before her, and probably all she had in the house. At 5 in the morning the guests departed. I had gained 300 louis. All the players were already on their way downstairs. I was the only one who had remained behind, and as I did not know any of them, no one noticed it. Olympe herself was lighting the way, and I was going to follow the others, when, turning back, I said to her, "I must speak to you." "Tomorrow," she said. "No, now." "What have you to say?" "You will see." And I went back into the room. "You have lost," I said. "Yes." "All that you had in the house?" She hesitated. "Be frank." "Well, it is true." "I have won 300 louis. Here they are, if you will let me stay here tonight." And I threw the gold on the table. "And why this proposition?" "Because I am in love with you, of course." "No, but because you love Marguerite, and you want to have your revenge upon her by becoming my lover. You don't deceive a woman like me, my dear friend. Unluckily, I am still too young and too good looking to accept the part that you offer me." "So you refuse?" "Yes." "Would you rather take me for nothing?" It is I who wouldn't accept then. Think it over, my dear Olympe. If I had sent some one to offer you these 300 louis on my behalf, on the conditions I attached to them, you'd have accepted. I prefer to speak to you myself. Accept without inquiring into my reasons. Say to yourself that you are beautiful, and that there is nothing surprising in my being in love with you." Marguerite was a woman in the same position as Olympe, and yet I should never have dared say to her the first time I met her what I had said to the other woman. I loved Marguerite. I saw in her instincts which were lacking in the other, and at the very moment in which I made my bargain, I felt a disgust toward the woman with whom I was making it. She accepted, of course, in the end, and at midday I left her house as her lover. But I quitted her without a recollection of the caresses and of the words of love which she had felt bound to shower upon me in return for the 6,000 francs which I left with her. And yet there were men who had ruined themselves for that woman. From that day I inflicted on Marguerite a continual persecution. Olympe and she gave up seeing one another, as you might imagine. I gave my new mistress a carriage and jewels. I gambled, I committed every extravagance which could be expected of a man in love with such a woman as Olympe. The report of my new infatuation was immediately spread abroad. Prudence herself was taken in, and finally thought that I had completely forgotten Marguerite. Marguerite herself, whether she guessed my motive, or was deceived like everybody else, preserved a perfect dignity in response to the insults which I heaped upon her daily. Only she seemed to suffer, for whenever I met her she was more and more pale, more and more sad. My love for her, carried to the point at which it was transformed into hatred, rejoiced at the sight of her daily sorrow. Often, when my cruelty towards her became infamous, Marguerite lifted upon me such appealing eyes that I blushed for the part I was playing, and was ready to implore her forgiveness. But my repentance was of only a moment's duration, and Olympe, who had finally put aside all self-respect, and discovered that by annoying Marguerite she could get from me whatever she wanted, constantly stirred up my resentment against her, and insulted her whenever she found an opportunity, with the cowardly persistence of a woman licensed by the authority of a man. At last Marguerite gave up going to balls or theatres for fear of meeting Olympe and me. Then direct impertinences gave way to anonymous letters, and there was not a shameful thing which I did not encourage my mistress to relate, and which I did not myself relate in reference to Marguerite. To reach such a point I must have been literally mad. I was like a man drunk upon bad wine, who falls into one of those nervous exaltations in which the hand is capable of committing a crime without the head knowing anything about it. In the midst of it all I endured a martyrdom. The not disdainful calm, the not contemptuous dignity with which Marguerite responded to all my attacks, and which raised her above me in my own eyes, enraged me still more against her. One evening Olympe had gone somewhere or other, and had met Marguerite, who for once had not spared the foolish creature, so that she had had to retire in confusion. Olympe returned in a fury, and Marguerite fainted and had to be carried out. Olympe related to me what had happened, declared that Marguerite, seeing her alone, had revenged herself upon her because she was my mistress, and that I must write and tell her to respect the woman whom I loved, whether I was present or absent. I need not tell you that I consented, and that I put into the letter which I sent to her addressed the same day, everything bitter, shameful, and cruel that I could think of. This time the blow was more than the unhappy creature could endure without replying. I felt sure that an answer would come, and I resolved not to go out all day. About 2 there was a ring, and Prudence entered. I tried to assume an indifferent air as I asked her what had brought her; but that day Madame Duvernoy was not in a laughing humour, and in a really moved voice she said to me that since my return, that is to say for about 3 weeks, I had left no occasion untried which could give pain to Marguerite, that she was completely upset by it, and that the scene of last night and my angry letter of the morning had forced her to take to her bed. In short, without making any reproach, Marguerite sent to ask me for a little pity, since she had no longer the moral or physical strength to endure what I was making her suffer. "That Mademoiselle Gautier," I said to Prudence, "should turn me out of her own house is quite reasonable, but that she should insult the woman whom I love, under the pretence that this woman is my mistress, is a thing I will never permit." "My friend," said Prudence, "you are under the influence of a woman who has neither heart nor sense. You are in love with her, it is true, but that is not a reason for torturing a woman who cannot defend herself. Let Mademoiselle Gautier send me her Comte de N, and the sides will be equal." "You know very well that she will not do that. So, my dear Armand, leave her alone. If you saw her you would be ashamed of the way in which you are treating her. She is white, she coughs, she won't last long now." And Prudence held out her hand to me, adding, "Come and see her. It will make her very happy." "I have no desire to meet Madame de N." "Madame de N is never there. She cannot endure him." "If Marguerite wishes to see me, she knows where I live. Let her come to see me. But, for my part, I will never put foot in the Rue d'Antin." "Will you receive her well?" "Certainly." "Well, I am sure that she will come." "Let her come." "Shall you be out to day?" "I shall be at home all the evening." "I will tell her." And Prudence left me. I did not even write to tell Olympe not to expect me. I never troubled much about her, scarcely going to see her one night a week. She consoled herself, I believe, with an actor from some theatre or other. I went out for dinner and came back almost immediately. I had a fire lit in my room, and I told Joseph he could go out. I can give you no idea of the different impressions which agitated me during the hour in which I waited. But when, toward 9 o'clock, I heard a ring, they thronged together into one such emotion that, as I opened the door, I was obliged to lean against the wall to keep myself from falling. Fortunately the anteroom was in half darkness, and the change in my countenance was less visible. Marguerite entered. She was dressed in black and veiled. I could scarcely recognize her face through the veil. She went into the drawing room and raised her veil. She was pale as marble. "I am here, Armand," she said. "You wished to see me, and I have come." And letting her head fall on her hands, she burst into tears. I went up to her. "What is the matter?" I said to her in a low voice. She pressed my hand without a word, for tears still veiled her voice. But after a few minutes, recovering herself a little, she said to me, "You have been very unkind to me, Armand, and I have done nothing to you." "Nothing?" I answered, with a bitter smile. "Nothing but what circumstances forced me to do." I do not know if you have ever in your life experienced, or if you will ever experience, what I felt at the sight of Marguerite. The last time she had come to see me, she had sat in the same place where she was now sitting. Only, since then, she had been the mistress of another man, other kisses than mine had touched her lips, toward which, in spite of myself, my own reached out, and yet I felt that I loved this woman as much, more perhaps, than I had ever loved her. It was difficult for me to begin the conversation on the subject which brought her. Marguerite no doubt realized it, for she went on. "I have come to trouble you, Armand, for I have two things to ask. Pardon for what I said yesterday to Mademoiselle Olympe, and pity for what you are perhaps still ready to do to me. Intentionally or not, since your return you have given me so much pain that I should be incapable now of enduring a fourth part of what I have endured till now. You will have pity on me, won't you? And you will understand that a man who is not heartless has other nobler things to do than to take his revenge upon a sick and sad woman like me. See, take my hand. I am in a fever. I left my bed to come to you, and ask, not for your friendship, but for your indifference." I took Marguerite's hand. It was burning, and the poor woman shivered under her fur cloak. I rolled the armchair in which she was sitting up to the fire. "Do you think, then, that I did not suffer?" said I. "On that night when, after waiting for you in the country, I came to look for you in Paris, and found nothing but the letter which nearly drove me mad? How could you have deceived me, Marguerite, when I loved you so much?" "Do not speak of that, Armand. I did not come to speak of that. I wanted to see you only not an enemy, and I wanted to take your hand once more. You have a mistress. She is young, pretty. You love her, they say. Be happy with her and forget me." "And you are happy, no doubt?" "Have I the face of a happy woman, Armand? Do not mock my sorrow, you who know better than any one what its cause and its depth are." "It only depended on you not to have been unhappy at all, if you are as you say." "No, my friend. Circumstances were stronger than my will. I obeyed, not the instincts of a light woman, as you seem to say, but a serious necessity, and reasons which you will know one day, and which will make you forgive me." "Why do you not tell me those reasons to day?" "Because they would not bring about an impossible reunion between us, and they would separate you, perhaps from those from whom you must not be separated." "Who do you mean?" "I cannot tell you." "Then you are lying to me." Marguerite rose and went toward the door. I could not behold this silent and expressive sorrow without being touched, when I compared in my mind this pale and weeping woman with the madcap who had made fun of me at the Opera Comique. "You shall not go," I said, putting myself in front of the door. "Why?" "Because, in spite of what you have done to me, I love you always, and I want you to stay here." "To turn me out tomorrow? No, it is impossible. Our destinies are separate. Do not try to reunite them. You will despise me, perhaps, while now you can only hate me." "No, Marguerite," I cried, feeling all my love and all my desire reawaken at the contact of this woman. "No, I will not forget everything, and we will be happy as we promised one another that we would be." Marguerite shook her head doubtfully, and said, "Am I not your slave, your dog? Do with me what you will. Take me, I am yours." And throwing off her cloak and hat, she flung them on the sofa, and began hurriedly to undo the front of her dress, for, by one of those reactions so frequent in her malady, the blood rushed to her head and stifled her. A hard, dry cough followed. "Tell my coachman," she said, "to go back with the carriage." I went down myself and sent him away. When I returned, Marguerite was lying in front of the fire, and her teeth chattered with the cold. I took her in my arms. I undressed her without her making a movement, and carried her icy cold to the bed. Then I sat beside her and tried to warm her with my caresses. She did not speak a word, but smiled at me. It was a strange night. All Marguerite's life seemed to have passed into the kisses with which she covered me, and I loved her so much that in my transports of feverish love I asked myself whether I should not kill her so that she might never belong to another. A month of love like that, and there would have remained only the corpse of heart or body. The dawn found us both awake. Marguerite was livid white. She did not speak a word. From time to time big tears rolled from her eyes and stayed upon her cheeks, shining like diamonds. Her thin arms opened from time to time to hold me fast, and fell back helplessly upon the bed. For a moment it seemed to me as if I could forget all that had passed since I had left Bougival, and I said to Marguerite, "Shall we go away and leave Paris?" "No, no," she said, almost with affright. "We should be too unhappy. I can do no more to make you happy, but while there is a breath of life in me, I will be the slave of your fancies." At whatever hour of the day or night you will, come, and I will be yours. But do not link your future any more with mine. You would be too unhappy, and you would make me too unhappy. I shall still be pretty for a while. Make the most of it, but ask nothing more." When she had gone, I was frightened at the solitude in which she left me. 2 hours afterward I was still sitting on the side of the bed, looking at the pillow which kept the imprint of her form, and asking myself what was to become of me, between my love and my jealousy. At 5 o'clock, without knowing what I was going to do, I went to the Rue d'Antin. Nanine opened to me. "Madame cannot receive you," she said in an embarrassed way. "Why?" "Because Monsieur le Comte de N. is there, and he has given orders to let no one in." "Quite so," I stammered. "I forgot." I went home like a drunken man. And do you know what I did during the moment of jealous delirium which was long enough for the shameful thing I was going to do? I said to myself that the woman was laughing at me. I saw her alone with the Count, saying over to him the same words that she had said to me in the night, and taking a 500-franc note I sent it to her with these words: "You went away so suddenly that I forgot to pay you. Here is the price of your night." Then, when the letter was sent, I went out as if to free myself from the instantaneous remorse of this infamous action. I went to see Olympe, whom I found trying on dresses, and when we were alone she sang obscene songs to amuse me. She was the very type of the shameless, heartless, senseless courtesan, for me at least, for perhaps some men might have dreamed of her as I dreamed of Marguerite. She asked me for money. I gave it to her, and, free then to go, I returned home. Marguerite had not answered. I need not tell you in what state of agitation I spent the next day. At 9:30 a messenger brought me an envelope containing my letter and the 500-franc note. Not a word more. "Who gave you this?" I asked the man. "A lady who was starting with her maid in the next mail for Boulogne, and who told me not to take it until the coach was out of the courtyard." I rushed to the Rue d'Antin. "Madame left for England at 6 o'clock," said the porter. There was nothing to hold me in Paris any longer, neither hate nor love. I was exhausted by this series of shocks. One of my friends was setting out on a tour in the East. I told my father I should like to accompany him. My father gave me drafts and letters of introduction, and 8 or 10 days afterward I embarked at Marseilles. It was at Alexandria that I learnt from an attaché at the embassy, whom I had sometimes seen at Marguerite's, that the poor girl was seriously ill. I then wrote her the letter, which she answered in the way you know. I received it at Toulon. I started at once, and you know the rest. Now, you have only to read a few sheets which Julie Duprat gave me. They are the best commentary on what I have just told you. End of chapter 24.
Of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Shin. Camille by Alexandre Dumas, Ville. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 25. Armand, tired by this long narrative, often interrupted by his tears, put his 2 hands over his forehead and closed his eyes to think, or to try to sleep, after giving me the pages written by the hand of Marguerite. A few minutes after, a more rapid breathing told me that Armand slept, but that light sleep which the least sound banishes. This is what I read. I copy it without adding or omitting a syllable. Today is the 15th December. I have been ill 3 or 4 days. This morning I stayed in bed. The weather is dark, and I am sad. There is no one by me. I think of you, Armand. And you, where are you while I write these lines? Far from Paris, far, far, they tell me, and perhaps you have already forgotten Marguerite. Well, be happy. I owe you the only happy moments in my life. I cannot help wanting to explain all my conduct to you, and I have written you a letter, but, written by a girl like me, such a letter might seem to be a lie, unless death had sanctified it by its authority, and instead of a letter it were a confession. Today I am ill. I may die of this illness, for I have always had the presentiment that I shall die young. My mother died of consumption, and the way I have always lived could but increase the only heritage she ever left me. But I do not want to die without clearing up for you everything about me, that is, if, when you come back, you will still trouble yourself about the poor girl whom you loved before you went away. This is what the letter contained. I shall like writing it over again, so as to give myself another proof of my own justification. You remember, Armand, how the arrival of your father surprised us at Bougival. You remember the involuntary fright that his arrival caused me, and the scene which took place between you and him, which you told me of in the evening. Next day, when you were at Paris waiting for your father, and he did not return, a man came to the door and handed in a letter from Monsieur Duval. His letter, which I enclose with this, begged me in the most serious terms to keep you away on the following day, on some excuse or other, and to see your father, who wished to speak to me, and asked me particularly not to say anything to you about it. You know how I insisted on you returning to Paris next day. You had only been gone an hour when your father presented himself. I won't say what impression his severe face made upon me. Your father had the old theory that a courtesan is being without heart or reason, a sort of machine for coining gold, always ready, like the machine, to bruise the hand that gives her everything, and to tear in pieces without pity or discernment those who set her in motion. Your father had written me a very polite letter, in order that I might consent to see him. He did not present himself quite as he had written. His manner at first was so stiff, insolent, and even threatening, that I had to make him understand that I was in my own house, and that I had no need to render him an account of my life, except because of the sincere affection which I had for his son. Monsieur Duval calmed down a little, but still went on to say that he could not any longer allow his son to ruin himself over me, that I was beautiful, it was true, but however beautiful I might be, I ought not to make use of my beauty to spoil the future of a young man by such expenditure as I was causing. At that there was only one thing to do, to show him the proof that since I was your mistress I had spared no sacrifice to be faithful to you without asking for more money than you had to give me. I showed him the pawn tickets, the receipts of the people to whom I had sold what I could not pawn, and I told him of my resolve to part with my furniture in order to pay my debts, and live with you without being a too heavy expense. I told him of our happiness, of how you had shown me the possibility of a quieter and happier life, and he ended by giving in to the evidence, offering me his hand, and asking pardon for the way in which he had at first approached me. Then he said to me, "So, madame, it is not by remonstrances, or by threats, but by entreaties that I must endeavour to obtain from you a greater sacrifice than you have yet made for my son." I trembled at this beginning. Your father came over to me, took both my hands, and continued in an affectionate voice, "My child, do not take what I have to say to you amiss. Only remember that there are sometimes in life cruel necessities for the heart, but that they must be submitted to. You are good. Your soul has generosity unknown to many women who perhaps despise you and are less worthy than you. But remember that there is not only the mistress, but the family, that besides love there are duties, that to the age of passion succeeds the age when man, if he is to be respected, must plant himself solidly in a serious position. My son has no fortune, and yet he is ready to abandon to you the legacy of his mother. If he accepted from you the sacrifice which you are on the point of making, his honour and dignity would require him to give you, in exchange for it, this income, which would always put you out of the danger of adversity. But he cannot accept this sacrifice, because the world, which does not know you, would give a wrong interpretation to this acceptance, and such an interpretation must not tarnish the name which we bear. No one would consider whether Armand loves you, whether you love him, whether this mutual love means happiness to him and redemption to you. They would see only one thing, that Armand Duval allowed a kept woman, forgive me, my child, for what I am forced to say to you, to sell all she had for him. Then the day of reproaches and regrets would arrive, be sure, for you or for others, and you would both bear a chain that you could never sever. What would you do then? Your youth would be lost, my son's future destroyed, and I, his father, should receive from only one of my children the recompense that I look for from both. You are young, beautiful, life will console you. You are noble, and the memory of a good deed will redeem you from many past deeds. During the 6 months that he has known you, Armand has forgotten me. I wrote to him 4 times, and he has never once replied. I might have died and he not known it. Whatever may be your resolution of living otherwise than as you have lived, Armand, who loves you, will never consent to the seclusion to which his modest fortune would condemn you, and to which your beauty does not entitle you. Who knows what he would do then? He has gambled, I know, without telling you of it, I know also, but, in a moment of madness, he might have lost part of what I have saved during many years, for my daughter's portion, for him, and for the repose of my old age. What might have happened may yet happen. Are you sure, besides, that the life which you are giving up for him will never again come to attract you? Are you sure, you who have loved him, that you will never love another? Would you not suffer on seeing the hindrances set by your love to your lover's life, hindrances for which you would be powerless to console him, if with age thoughts of ambition should succeed to dreams of love? Think over all that, madame. You love Armand. Prove it to him by the sole means which remains to you of yet proving it to him, by sacrificing your love to his future. No misfortune has yet arrived, but one will arrive, and perhaps a greater one than those which I foresee. Armand might become jealous of a man who has loved you. He might provoke him, fight, and be killed. Think, then, what you would suffer in the presence of a father who should call on you to render an account for the life of his son. Finally, my dear child, let me tell you all, for I have not yet told you all. Let me tell you what has brought me to Paris. I have a daughter, as I have told you, young, beautiful, and pure as an angel. She loves, and she too has made this love the dream of her life. I wrote all that to Armand, but, absorbed in you, he made no reply. Well, my daughter is about to marry, and she is to marry the man whom she loves. She enters an honorable family, which requires that mine has to be no less honorable. The family of the man who is to become my son-in-law has learned what manner of life Armand is leading in Paris, and has declared to me that the marriage must be broken off if Armand continues this life. The future of a child who has done nothing against you, and who has the right of looking forward to a happy future, is in your hands. Have you the right, and have you the strength to shatter it? In the name of your love and of your repentance, Marguerite, grant me the happiness of my child. I wept silently, my friend, at all these reflections which I had so often made, and which in the mouth of your father took a yet more serious reality. I said to myself all that your father dared not to say to me, though it had come to his lips 20 times, that I was, after all, only a kept woman, and that whatever excuse I gave for our liaison, it would always look like calculation on my part, that my past life left me no right to dream of such a future, and that I was accepting responsibilities for which my habits and reputation were far from giving any guarantee. In short, I loved you, Armand. The paternal way in which Monsieur Duval had spoken to me, the pure memories that he had awakened in me, the respect of this old man which I would gain, yours which I was sure of gaining later on, all that called up in my heart thoughts which raised me, in my own eyes, with a sort of holy pride, unknown till then. When I thought that one day this old man, who was now imploring me for the future of his son, would bid his daughter mingle my name with her prayers, as the name of a mysterious friend, I seemed to become transformed, and I felt a pride in myself. The exaltation of the moment perhaps exaggerated the truth of these impressions, but that was what I felt, friend, and these new feelings silenced the memory of the happy days I had spent with you. Tell me, sir, I said to your father, wiping away my tears, do you believe that I love your son? Yes, said Monsieur Duval. With a disinterested love? Yes. Do you believe that I had made this love the hope, the dream, the forgiveness of my life? Implicitly. Well, sir, embrace me once, as you would embrace your daughter, and I swear to you that that kiss, the only chaste kiss I have ever had, will make me strong against my love, and that within a week your son will be once more at your side, perhaps unhappy for a time, but cured for ever. You are a noble child, replied your father, kissing me on the forehead, and you are making an attempt for which God will reward you, but I greatly fear that you will have no influence upon my son. Oh, be at rest, sir, he will hate me. I had to set up between us, as much for me as for you, an insurmountable barrier. I wrote to Prudence to say that I accepted the proposition of the Comte N, and that she was to tell him that I would sup with her and him. I sealed the letter, and without telling him what it contained, asked your father to have it forwarded to its address on reaching Paris. He inquired of me what it contained. Your son's welfare, I answered. Your father embraced me once more. I felt 2 grateful tears on my forehead, like the baptism of my past faults, and at that moment when I consented to give myself up to another man, I glowed with pride at the thought of what I was redeeming by this new fault. It was quite natural, Armand. You told me that your father was the most honest man in the world. Monsieur Duval returned to his carriage and set out for Paris. I was only a woman, and when I saw you again I could not help weeping, but I did not give way. Did I do right? That is what I ask myself today, as I lie ill in my bed, and that I shall never leave perhaps until I am dead. You are witness of what I felt as the hour of our separation approached. Your father was no longer there to support me, and there was a moment when I was on the point of confessing everything to you, so terrified was I at the idea that you were going to bate and despise me. One thing which you will not believe, perhaps, Armand, is that I prayed to God to give me strength, and what proves that he accepted my sacrifice is that he gave me the strength for which I prayed. At supper I still had need of aid, for I could not think of what I was going to do. So much did I fear that my courage would fail me. Who would ever have said that I, Marguerite Gautier, would have suffered so at the mere thought of a new lover? I drank for forgetfulness, and when I woke next day I was beside the Count. That is the whole truth, friend. Judge me and pardon me as I have pardoned you for all the wrong that you have done me since that day. End of chapter 25. Recording by Linda Shin, Plano, Texas.
'26 of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bologna Times. Camille by Alexandre Dumas, fil. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 26. What followed that fateful night you know as well as I, but what you cannot know, what you cannot suspect, is what I have suffered since our separation. I heard that your father had taken you away with him, but I felt sure that you could not live away from me for long, and when I met you in the Champs-Élysées I was a little upset, but by no means surprised. Then began that series of days. Each of them brought me a fresh insult from you. I received them all with a kind of joy, for, besides proving to me that you still loved me, it seemed to me as if the more you persecuted me, the more I should be raised in your eyes when you came to know the truth. Do not wonder at my joy and martyrdom, Armand. Your love for me had opened my heart to noble enthusiasm. Still, I was not so strong as that, quite at once. Between the time of the sacrifice made for you and the time of your return a long while elapsed, during which I obliged to have recourse to physical means in order not to go mad, and in order to be blinded and deafened in that whirl of life into which I flung myself. Prudence has told you, has she not, how I went to all the fêtes and balls and orgies. I had a sort of hope that I should kill myself by all these excesses, and I think it will not be long before this hope is realized. My health naturally got worse and worse, and when I sent Madame Duvernoy to ask you for pity, I was utterly worn out, body and soul. I will not remind you, Armand, of the return you made for the last proof of love that I gave you, and of the outrage by which you drove away a dying woman, who could not resist your voice when you asked her for a night of love, and who, like a fool, thought for one instant that she might again unite the past with the present. You had the right to do what you did, Armand. People have not always put so high a price on a night of mine. I left everything after that. Olympe has taken my place with the Comte de N., and has told him, I hear, the reasons for my leaving him. The Comte de G. was at London. He is one of those men who give just enough importance to making love to women like me for it to be an agreeable pastime, and who are thus able to remain friends with women, not hating them because they have never been jealous of them, And he is, too, one of those grand seigneurs who open only a part of their hearts to us, but the whole of their purses. It was of him that I immediately thought. I joined him in London. He received me as kindly as possible, but he was the lover there of a woman in society, and he feared to compromise himself if he were seen with me. He introduced me to his friends, who gave a supper in my honour, after which one of them took me home with him. What else is there for me to do, my friend? If I had killed myself, it would have burdened your life, which ought to be happy, with a needless remorse. And then, what is the good of killing oneself when one is so near dying already? I became a body without a soul, a thing without a thought. I lived for some time in that automatic way, then I returned to Paris and asked for you. I heard then that you were gone on a long voyage. There was nothing left to hold me to life. My existence became what it had been 2 years before I knew you. I tried to win back the duke, but I had offended him too deeply. Old men are not patient, no doubt because they realize that they are not eternal. I got weaker every day. I was pale and sad and thinner than ever. Men who buy love examine the goods before taking them. At Paris there were women in better health, and not so thin as I was. I was rather forgotten. That is all the past up to yesterday. Now I am seriously ill. I have written to the duke to ask him for money, for I have none, and the creditors have returned, and come to me with their bills with pitiless perseverance. Will the duke answer? Why are you not in Paris, Armand? You would come and see me, and your visits would do me good. December 20. The weather is horrible. It is snowing, and I am alone. I have been in such a fever for the last 3 days that I could not write you a word. No news, my friend. Every day I hope vaguely for a letter from you, but it does not come, and no doubt it will never come. Only men are strong enough not to forgive. The duke has not answered. Prudence is pawning my things again. I have been spitting blood all the time. Oh, you would be sorry for me if you could see me. You are indeed happy to be under a warm sky, and not, like me, with a whole winter of ice on your chest. Today I got up for a little while, and looked out through the curtains of my window, and watched the life of Paris passing below, the life with which I have now nothing more to do. I saw the faces of some people I knew, passing rapidly, joyous and careless. Not one lifted his eyes to my window. However, a few young men have come to inquire for me. Once before I was ill, and you, though you did not know me, though you had nothing from me but an impertinence the day I met you first, you came to inquire after me every day. We spent 6 months together. I had all the love for you that a woman's heart can hold and give, and you are far away, you are cursing me, and there is not a word of consolation from you. But it is only chance that has made you leave me, I am sure, for if you were at Paris you would not leave my bedside. December 25. My doctor tells me I must not write every day, and indeed my memories only increase my fever. But yesterday I received a letter which did me good, more because of what it said than by the material help which it contained. I can write to you, then, to-day. This letter is from your father, and this is what it says. Madame, I have just learned that you are ill. If I were at Paris, I would come and ask after you myself. If my son were here, I would send him, but I cannot leave C, and Armand is 600 or 700 leagues from here. Permit me, then, simply to write to you, madame, to tell you how pained I am to hear of your illness, and believe in my sincere wishes for your speedy recovery. One of my good friends, M.H., will call on you. Will you kindly receive him? I have entrusted him with a commission, the result of which I await impatiently. Believe me, madam, yours most faithfully, This is the letter he sent me. Your father has a noble heart. Love him well, my friend, for there are few men so worthy of being loved. This paper signed by his name has done me more good than all the prescriptions of our great doctor. This morning M.H. called. He seemed much embarrassed by the delicate mission which M. Duval had entrusted to him. As a matter of fact, he came to bring me 3,000 francs from your father. I wanted to refuse at first, but M.H. told me that my refusal would annoy M. Duval, who had authorized him to give me this sum now, and later on whatever I might need. I accepted it, for, coming from your father, it could not be exactly taking alms. If I am dead when you come back, show your father what I have written for him, and tell him that in writing these lines the poor woman to which he was kind enough to write so consoling a letter wept tears of gratitude and prayed God for him. January 4. I have passed some terrible days. I never knew the body could suffer so. Oh, my past life! I pay double for it now. There has been some one to watch by me every night. I cannot breathe. What remains of my poor existence is shared between being delirious and coughing. The dining room is full of sweets and all sorts of presents that my friends have brought. Some of them, I dare say, are hoping that I shall be their mistress later on. If they could see what sickness has made of me, they would go away in terror. Prudence is giving her New Year's presents with those I have received. There is a thaw, and the doctor says that I may go out in a few days, if the fine weather continues. January 8. I went out yesterday in my carriage. The weather was lovely. The Champs-Élysées was full of people. It was like the first smile of spring. Everything about me had a festal air. I never knew before that a ray of sunshine could contain so much joy, sweetness, and consolation. I met almost all the people I knew, all happy, all absorbed in their pleasures. How many happy people don't even know that they are happy? Olympe passed me in an elegant carriage that Monsieur de N. has given her. She tried to insult me by her look. She little knows how far I am from such things now. A nice fellow, whom I have known for a long time, asked me if I would have supper with him and one of his friends, who, he said, was very anxious to make my acquaintance. I smiled sadly and gave him my hand, burning with fever. I never saw such an astonished countenance. I came in at 4, and had quite an appetite for my dinner. Going out has done me good. If I were only going to get well! How the sight of the life and happiness of others gives a desire of life to those who, only the night before, in the solitude of their soul and in the shadow of their sick room, only wanted to die soon. January 10. The hope of getting better was only a dream. I am back in bed again, covered with plasters which burn me. If I were to offer the body that people paid so dearly for once, how much would they give, I wonder, to-day? We must have done something very wicked before we were born, or else we must be going to be very happy indeed when we are dead, for God to let this life have all the tortures of expiation and all the sorrows of an ordeal. January 12. I am always ill. The Comte de N. sent me some money yesterday. I did not keep it. I won't take anything from that man. It is through him that you are not here. Oh, that good time at Bougival! Where is it now? If I come out of this room alive, I will make a pilgrimage to the house we lived in together, but I will never leave it until I am dead. Who knows if I shall write to you tomorrow? January 25. I have not slept for 11 nights. I am suffocated. I imagine every moment that I am going to die. The doctor has forbidden me to touch a pen. Julie Duprat, who is looking after me, lets me write these few lines to you. Will you not come back before I die? Is it all over between us forever? It seems to me as if I should get well if you came. What would be the good of getting well? January 28. This morning I was awakened by a great noise. Julie, who slept in my room, ran into the dining room. I heard men's voices, and hers protesting against them in vain. She came back crying. They had come to seize my things. I told her to let what they call justice have its way. The bailiff came into my room with his hat on. He opened the drawers, wrote down what he saw, and did not even seem to be aware that there was a dying woman in the bed that fortunately the charity of the law leaves me. He said, indeed, before going, that I could appeal within 9 days, but he left a man behind to keep watch. My God, what is to become of me? This scene has made me worse than I was before. Prudence wanted to go and ask your father's friend for money, but I would not let her. I received your letter this morning. I was in need of it. Will my answer reach you in time? Will you ever see me again? This is a happy day, and it has made me forget all the days I have passed for the last 6 weeks. I seem as if I am better, in spite of the feeling of sadness under the impression of which I replied to you. After all, no one is unhappy always. When I think that it may happen to me not to die, for you to come back, for me to see the spring again, for you still to love me, and for us to begin over again our last year's life. Fool that I am, I can scarcely hold the pen with which I write to you of this wild dream of my heart. Whatever happens, I loved you well, Armand, and I would have died long ago if I had not had the memory of your love to help me, and a sort of vague hope of seeing you beside me again. February 4. The Comte de G. has returned. His mistress has been unfaithful to him. He is very sad. He was very fond of her. He came to tell me all about it. The poor fellow is in rather a bad way as to money. All the same, he has paid my bailiff and sent away the man. I talked to him about you, and he promised to tell you about me. I forgot that I had been his mistress, and he tried to make me forget it too. He is a good friend. The Duke sent yesterday to inquire after me, and this morning he came to see me. I do not know how the old man still keeps alive. He remained with me 3 hours and did not say 20 words. 2 big tears fell from his eyes when he saw how pale I was. The memory of his daughter's death made him weep, no doubt. He will have seen her die twice. His back was bowed, his head bent toward the ground, his lips drooping, his eyes vacant. Age and sorrow weigh with a double weight on his worn-out body. He did not reproach me. It looked as if he rejoiced secretly to see the ravages that disease had made in me. He seemed proud of being still on his feet, while I, who am still young, was broken down by suffering. The bad weather has returned. No one comes to see me. Julie watches by me as much as she can. Prudence, to whom I can no longer give as much as I used to, begins to make excuses for not coming. Now that I am so near death, in spite of what the doctors tell me, for I have several, which proves that I am getting worse, I am almost sorry that I listened to your father. If I had known that I should only be taking a year of your future, I could not have resisted the longing to spend that year with you, and at least I should have died with a friend to hold my hand. It is true that if we had lived together this year, I should not have died so soon. God's will be done. February 5. Oh, come, come, Armand. I suffer horribly. I am going to die. Oh God, I was so miserable yesterday that I wanted to spend the evening, which seemed as if it were going to be as long as the last, anywhere but at home. The Duke came in the morning. It seems to me as if the sight of this old man, whom death has forgotten, makes me die faster. Despite the burning fever which devoured me, I made them dress me and take me to the Vaudeville. Julie put on some rouge for me, without which I should have looked like a corpse. I had the box where I gave you our first rendezvous. All the time I had my eyes fixed on the stall where you sat that day, though a sort of country fellow sat there, laughing loudly at all the foolish things that the actors said. I was half dead when they brought me home. I coughed and spat blood all the night. To-day I cannot speak. I can scarcely move my arm. My God, I am going to die. I have been expecting it, but I cannot get used to the thought of suffering more than I suffer now, and if after this the few characters traced by Marguerite were indecipherable, and what followed was written by Julie Duprat. February 18. Monsieur Armand, since the day that Marguerite insisted on going to the theatre, she has got worse and worse. She has completely lost her voice, and now the use of her limbs. What our poor friend suffers is impossible to say. I am not used to emotions of this kind, and I am in a state of constant fright. How I wish you were here. She is almost always delirious, but delirious or lucid, it is always your name that she pronounces when she can speak a word. The doctor tells me that she is not here for long. Since she got so ill, the old duke has not returned. He told the doctor that the sight was too much for him. Madame Duvernoy is not behaving well. This woman, who thought she could get more money out of Marguerite, at whose expense she was living almost completely, has contracted liabilities which she cannot meet, and seeing that her neighbor is no longer of use to her, she does not even come to see her. Everybody is abandoning her. Monsieur de G., prosecuted for his debts, has had to return to London. On leaving, he sent us more money. He has done all he could, but they have returned to seize the things, and the creditors are only waiting for her to die in order to sell everything. I wanted to use my last resources to put a stop to it, but the bailiff told me it was no use, and that there are other seizures to follow. Since she must die, it is better to let everything go than to save it for her family, whom she has never cared to see, and who have never cared for her. You cannot conceive in the midst of what gilded misery the poor thing is dying. Yesterday we had absolutely no money. Plate, jewels, shawls, everything is in pawn. The rest is sold or seized. Marguerite is still conscious of what goes on around her, and she suffers in body, mind, and heart. Big tears trickle down her cheeks, so thin and pale that you would never recognize the face of her whom you love so much, if you could see her. She has made me promise to write to you when she can no longer write, and I write before her. She turns her eyes toward me, but she no longer sees me. Her eyes are already veiled by the coming of death, yet she smiles, and all her thoughts, all her soul are yours, I am sure. Every time the door opens her eyes brighten, and she thinks you are going to come in. Then, when she sees that it is not you, her face resumes its sorrowful expression. A cold sweat breaks out over it, and her cheekbones flush. February 19, midnight. What a sad day we have had today, poor Monsieur Armand. This morning Marguerite was stifling. The doctor bled her, and her voice has returned to her a while. The doctor begged her to see a priest. She said yes, and he went himself to fetch an abbé from Saint Roch. Meanwhile Marguerite called me up to her bed, asked me to open a cupboard, and pointed out a cap and a long chemise covered with lace, and said in a feeble voice, "I shall die as soon as I have confessed. Then you will dress me in these things. It is the whim of a dying woman." Then she embraced me with tears and added, "I can speak, but I am stifled when I speak. I am stifling. Air." I burst into tears, opened the window, and a few minutes afterward the priest entered. I went up to him. When he knew where he was, he seemed afraid of being badly received. "Come in boldly, father," I said to him. He stayed a very short time in the room, and when he came out he said to me, "She lived a sinner, and she will die a Christian." A few minutes afterward he returned with a choir boy bearing a crucifix, and a sacristan who went before them ringing the bell to announce that God was coming to the dying one. They went all three into the bedroom where so many strange words had been said, but was now a sort of holy tabernacle. I fell on my knees. I do not know how long the impression of what I saw will last, but I do not think that, till my turn comes, any human thing can make so deep an impression on me. The priest anointed with holy oil the feet and hands and forehead of the dying woman, repeated a short prayer, and Marguerite was ready to set out for the heaven to which I doubt not she will go, if God has seen the ordeal of her life and the sanctity of her death. Since then she has not said a word or made a movement. 20 times I should have thought her dead if I had not heard her breathing painfully. February 20, 5 p.m. All is over. Marguerite fell into her last agony about 2 o'clock. Never did a martyr suffer such torture, to judge by the cries she uttered. 2 or 3 times she sat upright in the bed, as if she would hold on to her life, which was escaping toward God. 2 or 3 times, also, she said your name. Then all was silent, and she fell back on the bed, exhausted. Silent tears flowed from her eyes, and she was dead. Then I went up to her. I called her, and as she did not answer, I closed her eyes and kissed her on the forehead. Poor, dear Marguerite, I wish I were a holy woman, that my kiss might recommend you to God. Then I dressed her as she had asked me to do. I went to find a priest at Saint Roch. I burned 2 candles for her, and I prayed in the church for an hour. I gave the money she left to the poor. I do not know much about religion, but I think that God will know that my tears were genuine, my prayers fervent, my almsgiving sincere, and that he will have pity on her, who, dying young and beautiful, has only had me to close her eyes and put her in her shroud. February 22. The burial took place today. Many of Marguerite's friends came to the church. Some of them wept with sincerity. When the funeral started on the way to Montmartre, only 2 men followed it. The Comte de G., who came from London on purpose, and the Duke, who was supported by 2 footmen. I write you these details from her house, in the midst of my tears, and under the lamp which burns sadly beside a dinner which I cannot touch, as you can imagine, but which Nanine has got for me, for I have eaten nothing for 24 hours. My life cannot retain these sad impressions for so long, for my life is not my own any more than Marguerite's was hers. That is why I give you all these details on the very spot where they occurred, in the fear, if a long time elapsed between them and your return, that I might not be able to give them to you with all their melancholy exactitude. End of Chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Camille by Alexandre Dumas, Fils. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 27. You have read it? Said Armand, when I had finished the manuscript. I understand what you must have suffered, my friend, if all that I read is true. My father confirmed it in a letter. We talked for some time over the sad destiny which had been accomplished, and I went home to rest a little. Armand, still sad, but a little relieved by the narration of his story, soon recovered, and we went together to pay a visit to Prudence and to Julie Duprat. Prudence had become bankrupt. She told us that Marguerite was the cause of it, that during her illness she had lent her a lot of money in the form of promissory notes, which she could not pay, Marguerite having died without having returned her the money, and without having given her a receipt with which she could present herself as a creditor. By the help of this fable, which Madame Duvernoy repeated everywhere in order to account for her money difficulties, she extracted a note for 1,000 francs from Armand, who did not believe it, but who pretended to, out of respect for all those in whose company Marguerite had lived. Then we called on Julie Duprat, who told us the sad incident which she had witnessed, shedding real tears at the remembrance of her friend. Lastly, we went to Marguerite's grave, on which the first rays of the April sun were bringing the first leaves into bud. One duty remained to Armand, to return to his father. He wished me to accompany him. We arrived at C, where I saw M. Duval, such as I had imagined him from the portrait his son had made of him, tall, dignified, kindly. He welcomed Armand with tears of joy, and clasped my hand affectionately. I was not long in seeing that the paternal sentiment was that which dominated all others in his mind. His daughter, named Blanche, had that transparence of eyes, that serenity of the mouth, which indicates a soul that conceives only holy thoughts, and lips that repeat only pious words. She welcomed her brother's return with smiles, not knowing, in the purity of her youth, that far away a courtesan had sacrificed her own happiness at the mere invocation of her name. I remained for some time in their happy family, full of indulgent care for one who brought them the convalescence of his heart. I returned to Paris, where I wrote this story just as it had been told me. It has only one merit, which will perhaps be denied it, that is, that it is true. I do not draw from this story the conclusion that all women, like Marguerite, are capable of doing all that she did. Far from it. But I have discovered that one of them experienced a serious love in the course of her life, that she suffered for it, and that she died of it. I have told the reader all that I have learned. It was my duty. I am not the apostle of vice, but I would gladly be the echo of noble sorrow wherever I bear its voice in prayer. The story of Marguerite is an exception. I repeat, had it not been an exception, it would not have been worth the trouble of writing it. End of chapter 27. Recorded by David Lawrence in Brampton, Ontario, May 2009. End of Camille by Alexandre Dumas, Fils. Translated by Edmund Goss.